How's it going, bros? Welcome back. It's been a while. I hope you're doing well. I'm ggnosis. You might remember me from such things as the first part of the series. And if you haven't watched the first part, that's okay. It doesn't matter, you can watch it after this one. This part's pretty isolated. It's covering what I've got between 2000 and 2010 with some extras that I missed, in the first episode, stuff that I got afterwards. We've got collector's editions, we've got budget editions, we've got a lot of copies of Nocturne, we've got plastic jewel cases. That's cool. You'll want to stick around for those. Today I'm also introducing a new ranking system of sorts. Last episode I gave estimates based on price, and honestly that was kind of annoying to research, and let's be honest, price is always fluctuating. So now I'm doing it as a 5-star rating, which hopefully will be a lot more universal and a lot more, mostly unchanging unless somebody finds like a crate full of American Jack Bros copies, in which case, I just want to talk. With that said, my name is Hayden, but that name was already taken, so my parents settled on Gnosis. Join me as we ride the great flood of content I'm about to show you. Back in the prehistoric days of paperback and books, when Atlus first got the rights to develop the Shin Megami Tensei game, the rights were also acquired by Telenet Japan, and together they would co-develop multiple PC versions, which would then become the first published Megami Tensei games. I believe the MSX version here was the first of the batch to be released, despite a good majority of sources listing it as coming out at the same time as the PC-88 version. So like a lot of other MSX games, it's pretty rancid, but it does rank as one of my favorite items. It's simply the start of the franchise. It's probably more common than you think as well. Sure, you might need to take out a small loan, but you can find it. The box art is consistent between all versions. The only difference is the little tag that says which PC type the game is on. This version, the PC-88 version, likely released a month after the MSX one, and I based this on the team's postings in an old magazine which talked about its delay. I admit I haven't played these for long, but they're completely different beasts to the more infamous Famicom version, being top-down action labyrinth crawlers. Nowadays, not really playing it to have fun though, you're more here to see the start of the series. The MSX version, as expected of an MSX game, had quite a few limitations. You didn't have many colors, you had low resolution, average sound quality, so the PC-88 version is simply an enhanced version of that. Because of that, I don't label these necessarily as ports, more so as versions of each other. So Another Bible is another uncommon little game, and it has undoubtedly the series' worst box art. This little guy doesn't have too much going for him. He's got an ugly art style, ugly graphics. It's a tactical RPG, that sucks. Yeah, not too much at all. But I am planning on finishing it one day soon in a marathon with Last Bible 3 and Special, because I've never finished them. So if you'd like to join me, you should subscribe. Do it now. If you want to. I'm not your legal guardian, I can't tell you what to do, but you should do it. Another thing that was missing in the last video was the Devil Summoner Special Box, and after only 3 attempts at trying to buy this, I now have it secured and it's ready for the shelf where it shall sit for the remainder of its life. This edition is a 3-disc bundle featuring the game, the Akuma Zensho, which is that on-disc compendium made for the Saturn, and also a mini-CD with 4 songs and 4 developer interviews with Okada and Kaneko. It's technically the first collector's edition of the series, but it's not very exciting, is it? No. We're almost back at the 21st century now. Last Bible was re-released for the Game Boy Color in 1999, sadly with none of the changes made to the Game Gear version, which was released 5 years prior. As far as I'm aware, it's essentially a 1-to-1 port, but we did get an English release of it under Revelations the Demon Slayer, which is yet another one of those games we will not be selling a kidney for. Last Bible 2 followed in getting a GBC port about a month later, but unlike the first one, this didn't get an English release. I couldn't really tell you why that was. You would think that translations were worked on back to back considering how close they were released in Japan, but Atlus's localization team was still very small at the time, so you can imagine things like you know, Persona 2 would take priority. It's still a bit of a shame though, because this is a really comfy game that I had a lot of fun with. It's a great little Game Boy RPG that I think a lot of people disregard and miss out on. But here we are back in the 21st century. Persona 2 Batsu, or Eternal Punishment, is the direct but isolated sequel to Innocent Sin, and you know, this game is among my favorites in terms of story, lore, atmosphere, characters. It's great. Unlike Innocent Sin, this one got an English release, and naturally, like many of the other early English releases, it's stupid expensive. On average, the most expensive standalone Persona game as well. As with Revelations Persona, I'm not sure if I'll get these anytime soon. They're just too expensive, and it's not helped by the fact that a lot of these earlier releases were limited to America, so even if I found a good price, I need to acknowledge hefty shipping fees and import charges. In fact, you may have noticed that a lot of what I'm missing does come out of America for that reason. This is simply where my deep and profound hatred of America comes from. Batsu is also the first time we ever got a collector's edition. Yes. This edition of Batsu is known as the Deluxe pack, and I think this is actually a really great first collector's edition. It comes with both a watch and a necklace, which for the life of me, I've never been able to figure out what it references, but you know, there it is, it's pretty cool. I wouldn't dare wear this stuff out in public, but it is a neat, unique bonus and much cooler than a lot of things that you would typically get in collector's editions, like that Avengers bag that I'm still not over. It's all about that feeling of exclusivity, and I think this is just a great example of that. Soul Hackers 2 then makes a return with the PlayStation The Best Edition. Something I totally forgot to mention in the last video is that the original PSOne release actually came with 3 discs, with one of them being a Persona 2 Innocent Sin demo. The Best Edition does not come with that demo though, which makes me wonder if there was ever a 2-disc version of the original release. I've certainly never seen it, so if you know anything, I mean, let me know. Next is Shin Megami Tensei, but this time for the PS1. This copy is munted, which is probably how I picked it up for about $1. Even though I tried to clean this little guy up, its condition wins the Most Foul in the Collection award. I'm not too keen on the cover art in particular, but this era of Kaneko cover art is definitely my favorite. Maken Shao is next, and this is a PS2 remake of the original game, changing the first person to third person because X made people feel a little wonky. I don't actually remember much of this game, but luckily it's about 5 hours long, so I could replay it. If you were wondering where Shao comes from, it's an archaic Chinese symbol that they used, which looks like 2 X's stacked on top of each other. In other words, Maken XX. Isn't that really smart? Good thinking, Atlus. But next is the first print limited edition, which came with this little fancy card. Managed to get this in a bundle with about 10 other random games for $11, so I'd call that a pretty sick steal. I'm usually not a fan of these ensemble type box arts, but I actually really like this one. I think the red makes it pop and it's very stylish. Wish that this was actually used for the original edition because that one's just kind of a little boring. Shin Megami Tensei Devil Children White Book is apparently a sequel to Black and Red Book taking place 10 years after them, but it's another one of those games we don't have a translation for. You may have noticed that I don't have Black or Red Book for Game Boy, and yeah, I don't actually have many of the Devil Children games in general. I've always prioritized the other series, and honestly, I often just forget about it. Coming out the same day as White Book was Shin Megami Tensei Trading Card Summoner, which is another addition to the No Translation Club. It's based on the Digital Devil Story card game, which uses characters from all sorts of sub-series, which I've always loved, and a couple of these actually come with specific games, such as Nanjo coming with Persona 2, or Igor coming with Persona's PC release. You know, a full set of these would be really cool to see, but I refuse to get into card collecting. That's okay, right? If I don't collect these, do I really have what it takes to be a Megaten fan if I don't have all the cards? Just so nobody doubts me, I bought a copy of Persona 5 again. Actually, that is kind of cool. The copy of Persona 5 that I got recently. I'll show that in the future. Shin Megami Tensei 2 then got a release on the PS1 as well, and this is my favorite cover art of the series. I love that it doesn't directly reference the game's story, more so its themes. It also doesn't use the game's angel design, which I think is really funny, but this version, it's like if you took SMT2 and then put it on the PS1. I think. I haven't played it. Next is Devil Children Red Book Black Book. This is a remake that lets the player choose between the original Red or Black Book stories, and that's about all I know of it. It's another Dollar Club game and another No Translation Club game. Also, to the guy that's trying to sell this on Facebook Marketplace for $300, I hope you get it. So Atlus introduced a new budget range sometime around PSOne 2 Batsu called the Atlus Best Collection, which Maken Shao managed to become a part of. This title was given to a bunch of games over the years, I think as far as 2015 to 2016, and was probably just a reason to re-release certain games if they didn't quite reach the budget range of their respective consoles. However, the releases under it are actually quite spread out, so maybe there was some sort of criteria to it. Either way, this is the second Megaten related one to be released. The cover art's frame is white, and I mean it's not offensively bad, it just kinda sucks. Following that was Shin Megami Tensei 9, an attempted MMO that didn't last too long and is also a midquel between SMT1 and 2. Under the title and on the spine, there is additional text that says Standalone Edition, and I've never seen a picture of a copy without that. The team got on Yasuo Miyumetsu as a guest artist, and, well, here's a funny little critter. He's done animation work on a lot of famous animes, but is most well known for directing Kite and Mezzo, and both of those are very controversial with a lot of violence and, you know, stuff that would get it banned in multiple countries. The cover art does a good job of conveying the game, it's not very good. 9 is the third collector's edition, and similar to PSOne 2 Batsu, it is called the Deluxe Pack. It's had a 21-year win streak in being the fattest collector's edition in the series, with it just being overtaken by the newly released PSOne 5 One More edition. However, it is a much better collector's edition than that. This one comes with one of my favorite little items, the Maria figure. My favorite collector's editions are always the ones that come with figures such as these, and it's honestly a shame that we don't get too many of them. The rest of the editions are kind of whatever. You get a binder, a key holder, a watch, whatever these are, and finally an ID card, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't get you into clubs. We then have Shin Megami Tensei If for the PS1. This has yet another one of my favorite cover arts in the series. The framing and the looming figure of what Hazama is slowly becoming makes for a really striking piece of art. I think a lot of new gen Megaten art should take more inspiration from the old gen. Too many of them I feel are becoming more ensemble, which isn't necessarily bad, but they certainly don't stick with you like a lot of these ones do. This one also came with a collector's edition titled the 50th Anniversary Pack. But ggnosis, the franchise is only 16 years old, that's a bit funky. Well, apparently the not at all real school in the game is 50 years old. Don't ask me why they did that. I also really dislike this one, boys and girls. The sleeve art is bland, with the character key art just sort of standing there, and the framing, the positioning of the characters feels uninspired and lazy. You've got this wide chunk of nothing, and the back's not much of anything either. It sucks even more when you acknowledge the fact that this is the same game with art like this for the game's manual and promotional poster. I sincerely believe that the sleeve should have used the promotional poster art. The box itself is white. Yeah, I did a double take there, it's definitely white. As for the actual contents, well, if you're going back to school, then look no further. You have a book, a pen, and a very outdated calendar with the same art. Next is Devil Summoner Soul Hackers, which is the first of 2 PS1 books. You might not have heard of these. They are essentially the second edition of the PlayStation The Best series that started coming out when the PS1 revision was released. In fact, technically, the PS1 came out after the PS2. If you didn't know that, now you do. But anyway, why these PS1 books didn't follow the same conventions as the Best series is purely speculation. I don't think we ever got a concrete answer, and my only real guess is just a way to bring attention to the new PS1 model. That's purely just speculation though. The game itself is the exact same. Both that and the one for PSOne came out on the same day. None of these come in a standard PlayStation case, instead in these pretty flimsy plastic jewel ones, with their manuals coming outside the case, so you can imagine they would get lost very easily. Nevertheless, they are one-to-one reprints, so the value is no different. There is also no distinct color for the obis, though the two Mega 10 games did use blue. This also makes them tied for the Mega 10 game that got the most releases on one single console. That's cool. Next up is Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. This one is blue. If you haven't played this, then I don't know what you're watching me for. This is the classic SMT game. There won't be another one like this. Also, if you pick up the HD remaster, I recommend not playing with the voice acting on. The silence and personal interpretation of character voice is part of the atmosphere. It's a whole different experience. I'm gonna stop ranting now. Next is Nocturne again, but this one is not blue. This is a cover that was exclusive to Tsutaya, a Japanese video rental store. It has a unique, minimalist art of the Demi-Fiend on the cover, which, as far as I'm aware, was made exclusively for this version. There's probably no real deep meaning in the deal, you know, just bros helping bros out, but despite being an exclusive, it's relatively cheap and not too hard to find at all. Then we have Nocturne's Deluxe pack.
Oh, I spilled my coffee. You fucking idiot.
You drongo.
What'd you do that for, Hayden? Now I smell like beans.
Where was I? It sports a very basic design with only the game's name and a background of Amala runes. Continues the whole white insert box curse. It's not the most visually interesting to say the least. However, it does come with, again, one of my favorite collector's items, the Amala drum incense burner. I've always loved the simple but iconic design of the drum itself, and it's actually something you could display without being called a virgin, and that's the mark of a good collector's item. Moving along, we have a pricey one, Shin Megami Tensei for the GBA. This version actually has some additional story, giving more background into the characters and their motivations, which is super cool. This is typically the most expensive version of SMT1 though, which sucks because I don't have his sister, the best priced version yet. I also think this box art would be a bit divisive. I personally think it's quite clean cut, but I can see why some people might find it fairly boring. Maken Shao Demon Sword is the English release of the Maken remake. In a weird twist of fate, the English release was actually only ever released in PAL regions, which is very uncommon. I assume they added the subtitle Demon Sword to give it more of a recognizable English name on the shelf, similar to SMT3, how it had Nocturne in a larger font. Then we have SMT2 for the GBA. This is typically the most expensive numbered mainline game, and I was very lucky to be able to pick up both GBA remasters in a bundle, which helped slash that price by a hefty amount. I don't think I would have been able to get it in such good condition otherwise. Like the first SMT on GBA, it's got a simple but elegant box that complements the first, though I think I prefer it here just because of how unique a fully white box is. But now let's rotate back around to another version of Nocturne, Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne Maniax. This is the edition that added Dante, Fiends, the Amala Labyrinth dungeon, and I still find it crazy that they weren't in the original release. It just feels incomplete without a lot of that stuff, and they've been incorporated in such a natural feeling way. This version is also the basis for the English release we got, and yeah, this one's white. Digital Devil Saga Avatar Tuna. If you've ever thought about eating your friends and family, well, do I have a game for you? It's got some great unique demon designs. It's quite the emotional roller coaster. I'd love to read the novels that were written by Yu Godai, who was one of the original writers that left due to health reasons, but the last 3 volumes are untranslated, so I'm hanging out for them before I start. Then we have Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne again. This one is the PlayStation 2, the best version of the original release, not Maniax. Why would you pick this up over Maniax? I don't know, just really like the color blue and how well it pairs with bright yellow. Then we have Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne again. We're not done yet. Little fun fact, it may have dropped the number 3 because, don't want to confuse our English audience, but did you know that it actually was the 3rd game with the SMT title in English? Demikids both had the SMT title, came out a year earlier. It's the third one.
Don't you feel silly? Don't you feel stupid?
Next we have Digital Devil Saga Abaddon 2, the second part of the saga, this time with not as much eating people, but still a little bit. Satomi, who is better known for his work on Persona 1 and 2, primarily wrote this one, considering, as I mentioned before, Godai left due to health complications. Overall, I think it's a good continuation, but in my opinion, it doesn't fully stick the landing. But despite this, I remember this being, a strong entry with great character moments until the very end. Also, Ciello's in it. He's cool. I like that guy a lot. This next one was recently picked up by my friend Dan Ham. This was a unique box made as part of a PlayStation 2 memory card set designed by Hori, who does a variety of video game accessories in Japan. It doesn't come with a copy of DDS2, but its intention is to store the game, and I've always included these as alternate covers. Sadly though, I don't have the original packaging nor the memory card, but it doesn't bother me too much. I'm not about to start collecting every accessory in the series because that would just be financially unwise, silly, and a bit goofy. The English release of the first game came after that. This was the first title that didn't have the SMT title in Japan to get it in the English release, which essentially made it the English replacement for the brand name Megami Tensei. Sure, it started all this, is this game Shin Megami Tensei nonsense, but you can't deny it was effective in linking the franchise together. At some point, the Deluxe box set was released, which makes it the first English collector's edition, albeit a very small one. Came with an art book for both games, a soundtrack, and a space to slot your copy of DDS2 when that was eventually released. I'd like to also point out that the artwork they chose for the English release is leagues slicker than the original Japanese one. One of those very rare wins if the art ever was to change. But going from one of those rare wins to one of the goofiest losses, we have not Nocturne, but also just Nocturne again. Shin Megami Tensei Lucifer's Call. We love a cheesy name change. This is easily one of the worst box art changes in the series. It's not good. There was a small trend around this time though, not necessarily exclusive to the series, where Europe would have different cover art to American releases, and this is one of those examples. The name change itself was done to avoid any licensing issues with another game called Nocturne that came out a few years prior, and you can actually see that Atlus needed to license it in the title screen of the American release, but as for why it didn't carry over to this release is beyond me. It's also the origins of the featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series meme. You know the one, I know the one, it's never not funny. Rolling back to Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga 2, this version has a reversible cover. Mine's still sealed, so I'll put a picture of the art on the screen now. The PAL version has the second cover only, but they're essentially the same once they've been reversed. There is, however, another release with exclusive box art for the PAL version, which calls itself the Collector's Edition and came out almost 2 years later. Devil Summoner got a remaster on the PSP sometime in 2005. It sadly never got a release in English, but there has been a fan translation script floating around for some years now, so if you want to play it, you absolutely can. It's a shame that we never got this one with new box art. Devil Summoner has always had some amazing art that they could have easily repurposed for it, so... But Devil Summoner Raidou Kuzunoha vs the Soulless Army came out soon after the PSP remaster. This is another favourite of mine. It's short and sweet, but the story and characters are just, they're a lot of fun. Plus it has major lore implications, and you get to launch a cat into space. Like, that's pretty rad. Enter the original Persona 3, and damn, what amazing box art. So stylish, so visually interesting. Sojima really made a big impact of his work here, and honestly good for him, what with this being his first time as a full art director. I'm really glad they kept that stylistic flair for the English releases. That's a bit of a joke for you fellas. This is one of the big turning points in Megaten though. The future slowly but surely becomes very influenced by it. We then have another Atlus Best Collection entry, this time for Soulless Army. Nothing has really changed though, so there's not really much to talk about. Did I mention you can launch a cat into space? It is just so funny. What a cool game. Next is the Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga 2 Collector's Edition, which was released only in PAL regions, and almost an entire year and a half after the original English release. It has unique 3D rendered box art, which isn't actually unique, it was taken from the Japanese manual. But what makes it a collector's edition, you might ask? Cards. For those who watched my Persona 5 Royal One More video, this is where the small little card trend I mentioned started. Get excited. Again, another Atlus Best Collection entry, this time for the Devil Summoners PSP release. I also just realized that they never dropped the Shin Megami Tensei title for this remaster, despite Devil Summoner not using that extra title since Soul Hackers. Yeah, there's not much to really say about this one either, so moving on. Returning to Persona 3, we have the FES Append version. This copy is different from FES, with it acting as more of an expansion disc that you would put in after putting in the original Persona 3 to access that new content. It was basically a cheaper way of getting the new content, DLC before DLC was a big thing. It's something that I hope Atlus does digitally in the future, so you don't have to buy another copy of Persona 5 for $100 to just play an expansion. That would be really nice, I think. Next is Persona 4, and this is my favorite game. What are you gonna do about it, punk? You know, I wouldn't consider it the best in any sort of category, but I certainly find it one of the comfiest games I've ever played, and it's one that I can always go back to, although I probably never finish it again because it's very long. This was the first Mega 10 game I fully completed, and what got me motivated to go back and finish many of the others that I had tried, which means that it is also technically responsible for making me look irresponsible in front of my mother, and often breaking my bank account. We then have the PAL version of Shin Megami Tensei Persona 3 FES, a very rare win for the PAL box art. This one's well known for being very expensive, and it's in part due to its limited stock in PAL regions back when most consoles were region locked. This extends to most PAL copies actually. A good majority of them are more expensive because Atlus didn't see PAL regions as part of their main market for a good while. And in fact, that mentality still somewhat exists today, especially in Australia where I am. But to make matters worse, the aim of this collection is to get copies that have distinct box art, so typically I'll merge the NTSC and PAL versions together as the general English release, except in rare circumstances such as this one, and that's fine and all, but Persona 3 has 3 unique copies, and then 5 unique copies of FES, and then 5 unique copies of Portable, and that's not to mention that Reload just got announced, so Devil Summoner Raidou Kuzunoha vs King Abaddon was the direct sequel to the first one. It's another fantastic game, huge gameplay improvements, more huge lore implications, more craziness, and a plotline that involves marrying bug people. That was really cool. This game also defined what a lot of people expected from the next big Devil Summoner entry, which I think contributed, at least in some part, to the general dissatisfaction with Soul Hackers 2. You know, imagining a mix of Raidou Kuzunoha's gameplay and Soul Hackers setting has me just, it's got me going like a little fanboy. Next is Raidou Kuzunoha vs King Abaddon Plus, which will be our last copy of Nocturne we look at for today. This version was the Maniax Chronicle Edition, and was the first version of Nocturne to replace Dante with Raidou, and it wasn't until recently that we actually got to play this version officially. King Abaddon, on the other hand, is unchanged as far as I'm aware. It's a one-to-one port, which then begs the question, why does this even exist? Would have made sense bundling this with the first Raidou Kuzunoha game, but Nocturne? Maybe there was an interview out there somewhere that explained it, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a cool little link between the franchise's branches. Shin Megami Tensei Persona 4 is the English version of Persona 4. What? Pretty sure every single copy has the includes bonus disc at the bottom, because I've certainly never seen one without it. I briefly mentioned it before, but I usually don't like the chaotic ensemble box arts. If there's no focus or too much to look at, then more times than not I'm just not a big fan. This one in particular is kind of pushing it in my opinion. Luckily it has that focus on the yellow strip with Yu and Izanagi, but then outside of that, it falls into that trap of being a bit too much all at once for me. I personally think that the manual art should have taken center stage here, because not only is that a gorgeous piece that uses the game's aesthetics, but it shows just enough to not feel bloated, and it feels more like it's in the same series next to Persona 3's box art. And this is what I mean by a chaotic ensemble artwork with no real focus. Megami Ibunroku Devil Survivor gives major MCU poster vibes, just a bunch of characters with no real rhyme or rhythm in their placement. Where are you actually meant to look? Overclocked, on the other hand, that's a ensemble artwork done well. That's a good piece of art. Either way, this is a neat little new sub-series with new artist Suzuhito Yasuda, the Boob Man, and a return to SRPG gameplay. It's actually got a pretty good story in my opinion. I actually quite liked it. Quite like the whole bell thing. I just wish that those demons were actually related. It's like 60 to 70% of them are. Like, commit to the bit. A remake of the first Persona followed, and it is still unforgivable that you can't play with the original soundtrack. Just simply inexcusable, unacceptable, unpardonable. Outside of the soundtrack changing the entire tone, of course, it's a decent game. Very faithful to the original, but with a lot of quality of life updates that I think really benefit it. The box art, however, looks dated now, and it looked dated then, with the 3D model look to its characters, which, again, it sucks because Persona 1 has some amazing artwork. All of them would have made great contenders for the cover art. Next is Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner 2 Raidou Kuzunoha vs King Abaddon. And I'm pretty sure this is the game with the longest title, and is probably when they started to realize that, you know, hey, maybe we should drop the SMT title on everything that isn't actually Shin Megami Tensei. What I would personally do is use something like an icon such as Loki's head or hexagram, something to symbolize that it's a part of Megaten, maybe on each spine so it doesn't subtract from the box art. Kind of like how, strange comparison, but Super Monkey Ball did it on the Switch. It's a really bizarre comparison, but yeah, no, they did it. Versus King Abaddon also came with a small American collector's edition called the Rai-ho Special Edition. It only comes with this little guy, the little Rai-ho plushie. You know, it's certainly enough to please me. These were made as a limited run, but Atlus never mentioned how many units they were making, so apparently the highest number found is just over 40,000. My number is 24,916, which is also conveniently my pin number. Next is Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey, one of the series' best stories, and has music by Meguro that still blows me away considering it's on the DS. This cover is a lot more focused than the last couple I've shown off, but to me it lacks that same confident flair you see in like Nocturne and Digital Devil Saga. In my opinion, it's actually one of Kaneko's weaker pieces. It feels like a static PNG pasted over a generic space background. It's not much, but at least it has the Demonica design, which is cool as hell. Next is the first of 6 copies of Persona 3 Portable, and is also Atlus's first game to use the revised PSP cover art template, which is something that you never knew you wanted to know, and now you do. Make sure you tell everyone. This version added the female protagonist, and since then we have not gone a day without somebody asking for another one. To be honest with you, yeah, I kind of liked her route more than the male protagonist, mostly because of the social links and, you know, girls. But I also agree she should have been an emo girl. I just think that would have been really neat. Here's the Atlus Best Selection version of Persona, by the way. I don't have much else to say about this one. It says it's the best on the side, so by definition, it must be the best. Next we have Persona 4, the best version. And man, I really don't vibe with these boarded covers. Surely Sony could have worked something out that was just more visually appealing. You know, they make it feel cheap, which Like, yes, that's part of the point of these releases, but come on, it should be like a celebration of the game. It did well enough to warrant the best title, so give it some flair, some pizzazz, you know, just don't slap the cover on this grey border with size 16 Arial italic font to scream, ah, this one's the best, bye bye bye. Now, I know that we're entering 2011 territory, and that's meant for the next video, but we're so close to 100, you know I had to hit it. So, rounding out this episode off with our 100th entry is Catherine, our other arguably Megaten game. You heard the spiel with Maken in the first episode, but this time it's more about that Persona imagery and the fact that the team considered it as a sort of tech demo for Persona 5. I'd rank this as one of my favorite games in general. There's so much I could talk about here. It's such a charming little game with so much substance in what's otherwise a fairly short game. A little something to note, remember when we went and talked about what 7 or 8 copies of Nocturne today? Yeah, well, there's 15 versions of Catherine and 6 collector's editions for one game. I don't know how or why, but there is. That's a hell of a lot of collector's editions for something that only had one remaster. That's a bit overkill. Hey, welcome back. Did you have fun? And with that, we have covered 100 different entries, and honestly, just what a relief it is. This episode took so much longer to make than I'd like to admit. It was actually 95% done. I'd say about 95%, maybe even more. It was 95% done for probably 4 months. But yeah, no, you know, only took 9 months. It's not that long. I'd like to make mention of Pro Reese, who created the amazing Mothman taxidermy that I showed off at the beginning. He did an incredible job of it. He's a small independent creator, so, you know, I'm sure he would appreciate if some of you checked him out. If part 3 is already out, it will be somewhere on the screen, because yes, you can do that. I learnt that since the last video. I had a long time to learn. But believe it or not, we're actually only nearing the halfway point of what I've got here, and that's only about 33% of everything total. As like last I checked. There's still quite a lot, but you know, it's coming along slowly but surely. Did you know that 100% of my subscribers now drink water? Whoa! Woo! Good job. I'm proud of you guys. I believed in you, and it paid off. I'm proud of you. Part 3 is going to have a lot more modern games. It's going to have a pretty substantial increase to the collector's editions and even a handful of limited edition consoles. I also want to take a moment to thank each and every person who watched and commented on the last part. I love being able to interact with you guys, and that's the main reason why I want to keep creating. So yeah, I mean, the positive reception in general was just amazing, so hoping to maintain a bit of this momentum moving forward. Anyway, bugger off. Video's over. I hope you have a lovely day. Do you have anything to add? See, it's funny because I did this in the previous video.